Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, the podcast that brings you a clear, in-depth look at what's happening on the Hill. I'm Victor.
And I'm Lainey. Today we're unpacking a packed docket, a series of Senate resolutions on Ukraine, a handful of House and Senate bills ranging from wireless infrastructure to childcare for military families, a slate of important nominations, a recent committee meeting, and highlights from the latest congressional record. Let's start with the Ukraine resolutions because they set the tone for U.S. foreign policy this week.
The Senate has adopted 3 separate resolutions. Senate Resolution 109, introduced by Senator Sanders, is a sense-making resolution that calls on Russian President Vladimir Putin to withdraw Russian forces from Ukraine immediately. It frames the invasion, which began on February 24, 2022, as a clear violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, noting that roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory remains occupied and that hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost.
Right, and Senate Resolution 111, introduced by Senator Van Hollen, goes a step further. It formally condemns the Russian armed forces and senior Russian officials for crimes against humanity and war crimes in Ukraine. The language is based on findings from the State Department and an independent international commission, so it carries a weight of documented evidence. While a resolution doesn't impose sanctions, it adds diplomatic pressure and signals to allies that the Senate is united in its condemnation.
The third, Senate Resolution 114, reiterates that the war started with an unprovoked full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, and ties that aggression to earlier illegal moves, namely the 2014 annexation of Crimea and the occupation of parts of the Donbass. By linking the current conflict to those prior actions, the Senate is building a historical narrative that could support future legislative or aid packages.
Those resolutions are symbolic but important. They illustrate how the Senate uses sense resolutions to shape foreign policy discourse without needing the president's signature. They're passed by a simple majority, and because they don't have the force of law, they're often quicker to adopt than full bills.
Switching gears to the House, we have a couple of procedural moves. House Resolution 1274, passed on May 12, 2026, simply repeals Section 11 of a prior House resolution, number 1224. The text doesn't explain why, but the purpose is clear. It's a legislative correction, a common practice when a prior provision is found to be problematic or redundant.
Then there's House Resolution 1275, which is a bit of a legislative shortcut. It bundles 5 separate measures: House Bills 5,625, 6,260, 8,365, a concurrent resolution supporting law enforcement officers, and House Bill 8469 for military construction and veterans affairs into a single procedural package. By waiving certain points of order and limiting debate, the House can move these items through faster, especially when they're non-controversial or have broad support.
Let's break down those 5. House Bill 5,625 would direct the Attorney General to publish a list of every state and local jurisdiction that permits cashless bail, shining a light on a practice that's been controversial for its impact on low-income defendants. House Bill 6,260 amends Title 18 of the United States Code to criminalize fraud in bail posting, aiming to protect the integrity of the bail system. House Bill 8,365 sets conditions on the appointment of court monitors, which could affect how courts oversee compliance in complex cases.
The concurrent resolution, HCon Res 96, expresses support for law enforcement officers, a symbolic gesture that often accompanies broader public safety legislation. Finally, House Bill 8,469 appropriates funds for military construction and the Department of Veterans Affairs for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2027. That's a standard annual funding bill, but it's crucial for maintaining infrastructure and services for service members and veterans.
Moving to the Senate's legislative agenda, the first standout is the Wireless Leadership Act, Senate Bill 5147. It's designed to speed up the siting of personal wireless service facilities. Think small cell towers that bring 5G to neighborhoods. The bill sets clear timelines for state and local governments to approve or deny requests, while preserving local zoning authority. It also prevents discrimination among providers, which could level the playing field for smaller companies trying to expand coverage.
That could have a direct impact on everyday Americans. Faster rollout of high-speed wireless could improve remote work, telehealth, and even rural broadband access. The bill also includes a review mechanism So if a local decision conflicts with the federal standards, there's a path for judicial or administrative appeal.
Next, the No Passes for Polluters Act of 2026, Senate Bill 4404, tightens executive authority under the Clean Air Act. It requires the president to obtain congressional approval via a joint resolution before using certain exemptions, like those that would let federal agencies sidestep emissions standards. It also repeals an exemption that allowed hazardous air pollutants to skip compliance schedules. In short, it puts a check on the executive branch, ensuring that any rollback of environmental protections gets a vote in both chambers.
That's a big deal for environmental groups and for communities near federal facilities that worry about air quality. By forcing a joint resolution, the bill raises the threshold for change from a simple agency rule to a full legislative process.
The Hero Child Care for Military Families Act, Senate Bill 4335, tackles a different challenge. It expands the pool of eligible child care providers for Department of Defense programs, introduces pre-clearance for child care employees, allows job-sharing arrangements, and gives limited benefits to child care staff. It also mandates a unified data system to track child care capacity and workforce readiness, plus reports linking child care availability to military readiness.
For military families, reliable child care is a retention issue. If a service member can't find trustworthy care for their kids, they might consider leaving the service. This bill aims to make child care a strategic asset, not just a benefit.
The Save Moms and Babies Act of 2026, Senate Bill 3697, takes a different direction. It seeks to restrict abortion drug access by prohibiting approval of new abortion drugs, banning investigational use exemptions for existing drugs, and imposing stricter labeling, in-person administration, and adverse event reporting. The bill frames these measures as protecting pregnant women and unborn children.
It's part of the broader national debate on reproductive health. If passed, it would add layers of regulation that could limit how clinicians prescribe and dispense medication-induced abortions, potentially affecting access in states where abortion is already restricted.
On the economic front, the Made in America Manufacturing Finance Act of 2025, Senate Bill 1555, raises loan limits for small manufacturers under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act. The new caps, $7.5 million and $9 million for standard loans and $10 million for export-related loans, are intended to give small producers more capital to grow and compete. The bill also requires the SBA Inspector General to analyze the impact and for the SBA to report annually on job creation and retention.
That could be a boost for the manufacturing sector, especially in regions hit hard by offshoring. By expanding credit, the bill hopes to keep production domestic and preserve jobs.
The National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Coin Act, Senate Bill 4051, is a commemorative coin proposal. It directs the Treasury to mint gold, silver, and clad coins honoring fallen firefighters, with surcharges supporting the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. The program is designed to raise public awareness and funds without costing the Treasury.
While symbolic, the coin program can generate significant charitable revenue and keep the sacrifices of firefighters in the public eye.
The Shine for Autumn Act of 2025, Senate Bill 2858, focuses on stillbirths. It authorizes $6 million annually from 2026 to 2030 for state grants to improve surveillance, data collection, and public health capacity around stillbirths. The Secretary of Health and Human Services must issue guidelines and develop educational materials. The goal is better data, better awareness, and ultimately fewer stillbirths.
Stillbirths have been underreported historically. By funding systematic data collection, the bill could fill a critical knowledge gap and drive targeted interventions.
The Tribal Warrant Fairness Act, Senate Bill 3041, expands the authority of the U.S. Marshals Service to assist tribal law enforcement in fugitive matters and amends the Presidential Threat Protection Act to include Indian tribes. It's a modest but important step toward strengthening federal tribal cooperation in criminal justice.
For tribal communities, having federal assistance can improve safety and ensure that warrants are executed fairly and efficiently.
The Retirement Savings for Americans Act of 2025, Senate Bill 1526, creates the American Worker Retirement Plan, a government-backed retirement option with automatic enrollment, a matching tax credit, and a range of investment choices. It's aimed at workers who lack employer-sponsored plans, giving them a secure way to build retirement wealth.
That could be transformative for the millions of gig economy and low-wage workers who currently have limited retirement options. Automatic enrollment and a matching credit make saving almost effortless.
Finally, the Uterine Fibroid Intervention and Gynecological Health Treatment Act of 2025, Senate Bill 2531 authorizes HHS grants to states for research, public awareness campaigns, and clinical services targeting uterine fibroids. It also requires periodic reports to Congress on program effectiveness. Fibroids disproportionately affect Black women, so the bill aims to address a significant health disparity.
By funding early detection and treatment, the legislation could reduce the need for invasive surgeries and improve quality of life for many women.
That covers the substantive legislation. Let's turn to the nominations that are moving through the Senate. The most high profile is Kevin Warsh, nominated to be chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, succeeding Jerome Powell. Warsh's background in finance and previous Fed experience will be scrutinized, especially given the current focus on inflation and monetary policy.
Alongside Warsh, we have a slate of U.S. Attorney nominations: Andrew Benson for the District of Maine, Zachary Keller for the Western District of Louisiana, William Boyle for the Eastern District of North Carolina, Brian David Miller for the Middle District of Pennsylvania, Kevin Holmes for the Western District of Arkansas, Richard Price for the Western District of Missouri, James Bishop for the Middle District of North Carolina, and Darren Smith for the District of Wyoming. These positions are critical for federal law enforcement, and each nominee will undergo a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing before a full Senate vote.
There are also key executive nominations: Ademola Adewale Sadiq for Director of the African Development Bank, Brian Barber as U.S. Marshal for the Western District of Louisiana, Wesley Brooks as Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, Matthew Anderson as Deputy Administrator of NASA, and Brian Birdwell as an Assistant Secretary of Defense. Each of these roles carries significant policy weight. NASA's Deputy Administrator, for example, will help steer the agency's Artemis lunar program and climate monitoring missions.
One nomination listed without description, nomination 119-975, remains a mystery for now, but the Senate will likely request clarification before moving forward.
On May 13, 2026, an Various Measures meeting was held by an unknown committee at 2 p.m. UTC. While the agenda isn't detailed, such meetings typically involve briefings on pending legislation, oversight of agency actions, or coordination among committee staff. It's a reminder that much of the work happens behind the scenes before bills reach the floor.
Speaking of behind the scenes, the congressional record gives us a glimpse of recent House activity. Volume 172, number 80, dated May 12th, highlighted several honors. Representative Tom Emmer praised House Floor Director Dennis Knauls for a decade of service. The House recognized Cherie DeVaugh, the first woman trainer to win the Kentucky Derby, and Shrikar Carey, whose AI app, OncoGat, can diagnose breast cancer in seconds. The session also featured a message from former President Donald Trump, extending a national emergency on information technology supply chain security, a continuation of the 2022 executive order aimed at protecting critical infrastructure from foreign exploitation.
The previous day's record, Volume 172, number 79, shows the House considering a range of bills: micromobility funding, amendments to the Federal Election Campaign Act, and a prohibition on importing connected vehicles from foreign adversaries. Joint resolutions to disapprove rules from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau were also on the docket, as were resolutions supporting Arthritis Awareness Month and celebrating 200 years of diplomatic relations with Peru.
Those entries illustrate the breadth of issues Congress tackles, from infrastructure and election integrity to public health and foreign policy symbolism.
To sum up, we've covered a suite of Ukraine-related Senate resolutions, a batch of House procedural moves, a diverse set of Senate bills addressing wireless deployment, environmental oversight, military family child care, reproductive health, manufacturing finance, commemorative coins, stillbirth research, tribal justice, retirement security, and uterine fibroid health. We've also walked through a slate of key nominations and highlighted recent committee and floor activity.
Listeners should keep an eye on a few upcoming milestones: the Senate's confirmation hearings for Kevin Warsh and the U.S. Attorney nominees, the House's debate on the cashless bail and bail fraud bills embedded in House Resolution 1275, and the progress of the No Passes for Polluters Act, which could reshape how the executive branch implements environmental exemptions. Also watch for any further statements or actions related to the Ukraine resolutions, especially if new diplomatic developments arise.
That's it for today's Capital Catch-Up. Thanks for joining us.
Stay tuned, stay informed, and we'll be back with the next round of congressional developments.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.